homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm, or welcome back. Today in the kitchen and outside on the grill, we are making tandoori chicken. And I'm one of those people that when a recipe calls for a whole bunch of different spices, I get real excited rather than real intimidated, because I have a ton of different spices on hand and I love recipes that allow me to pull out a lot of them and use them rather than having them just sit and kind of age in a cupboard. But there are some simpler ways to do this recipe, and I'll put some alternatives down in the description for you if you don't have a bunch of different spices and you just want a shortcut for this. But I had a lot of fun looking at different tandoori recipes and kind of mixing and matching and coming up with something that I thought was good. This recipe, just like curry powder, the spices that go on tandoori can vary a lot depending on the individual making the recipe, and probably regionally as well. The difference, if you've ever wondered, between tandoori chicken and something like a chicken tikka masala, is tandoori is normally cooked in a tandoori oven, which is a super hot oven that gives you a really great sear on chicken. Obviously, I'm going to just do this on the grill. Chicken tikka masala is treated somewhat differently. Both of these recipes have a yogurt and spice mix marinade that goes on the chicken, but this came out incredible. We raised 25 meat birds this spring, and we lost one bird and then somebody gave us a bird. And so we ended up with 25, which was really nice because you almost always lose one or two. And we've had a lot of issues with predators in the past, and we didn't lose a single bird to predators because my husband basically built a Fort Knox outdoor pen for these chickens. And we butchered them over the course of 2 weeks. And so we butchered the first set of 8 birds, I believe, right around Memorial Day, and then we butchered the rest of the birds the following week. The birds that we butchered first were quite large and, you know, sort of getting that sumo wrestler waddle that they get when they get really big, and those were typically the roosters. And so it was kind of nice to break this up into 2 different sessions because the hens weren't quite as big, and giving them an extra week to get a little bit bigger while not competing with all of those roosters for food seemed to have worked really well. The bird in this recipe, we spatchcocked it, so we cut out the spine, and so cleaned, and with the spine removed, it was still over 5 pounds. So really nice sized bird. And yeah, this was just absolutely delicious with homegrown chicken, but obviously you can do this with store chicken as well. So tandoori chicken, let's get started. So I'm basing this spice rub recipe on an Indian cookbook that I have called Indian for Everyone by Anupy Singla. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. And the only spice that they called for that I didn't have on hand was something called ajwain, which is garam seeds. And I have a lot of random Indian spices, but that was not one of them, so I just left it out. I did go ahead and look at America's Test Kitchen recipes for tandoori, and they basically use a garam masala spice mix as part of their mix instead of the individual spices, which makes sense because there's some pretty good baking spices in here. You want to make sure you add enough salt. A typical salt brine on chicken is about 1%, and so I just weighed the chicken and then added 1% salt. That's going to give me some nice seasoning in this mix, since the original recipe didn't actually call for any salt. Here is our beautiful homegrown chicken. And we were going to just spatchcock this, which means you leave it whole, but you cut out the backbone. And because it was so big, it was very hard. And so my husband went ahead and just split the breast on this. So we ended up with 2 pieces. To our spice mix, I am mixing in about 1.5 cups of yogurt. The original recipe called for Greek yogurt. I didn't have Greek yogurt. I never worry about that. So this is just plain low-fat yogurt. And I'm just going to smear this all over this chicken. If I wanted to get super fancy, I could have gotten it underneath the skin instead of on top of the skin, but I was not feeling that today. And so went ahead and gave this a good spa day with tandoori rub and covered it, left it in the refrigerator for probably about 6 or 7 hours. Overnight would have been ideal, but again, just sometimes you just don't have the time for that. And so this was 6 or 7 hours in the fridge. And I happen to have these 2-gallon freezer bags that my husband had originally cut the chicken in half and just stuck it in a freezer bag in the fridge. And it turned out it was almost big enough to be able to completely put over this 9 by 13 pan. I couldn't zip it up, but it did fit in there. So that was really convenient because I had already used this once. I can't get those in regular stores, but restaurant supply stores do have them. So here we go, 6 hours, 7 hours later. I'm gonna pull this back out, get my grill ripping hot. And then because this is chicken that is essentially a whole chicken with the bone in, it's gonna take a long time to cook because it's a lot of meat. I'm not chunking it up into individual pieces. I did go ahead, once I got this really hot, I turned my grill down to medium because I knew this was gonna take 30 to 40 minutes at least in order to get this all the way cooked. So here's our chicken initially on the grill. I do have a temperature probe in there in the breast. I am aiming for about 150. And I know that seems really low if you have any background in food safety, because the food safety police will tell you 165. 165 on a chicken breast makes a dry, inedible breast. It's terrible. And there's some fun science around this, which is 165 is an instant kill for bacteria that might be on that chicken, but 155, you only need to reach 155 for less than a minute in order to have that same kill rate. And so I was aiming for 150, and then I knew that the carryover heat after it was off the grill would get it to 155, and that would be enough to kill any bacteria that might be on here. I'm not super worried about bacteria in terms of salmonella and things because these are homegrown birds, but it's safe to do that. And then when your breast is at 155 instead of 165, it's actually juicy and delicious instead of dried out and rubbery. I don't bother worrying too much about the thighs because your thighs are always going to be hotter than your breast meat, and as long as they're around 175, you're golden. So I was checking this back and forth, flipping it back and forth. I think the total time on this was probably about 45 minutes. And I am using an individual probe thermometer as well as the one that I've got in there, just to double check the other side and to make sure that I'm not sitting in a weird spot, because sometimes you can get against the bone or you go too far in and so it's not giving you an accurate reading. So I'm just double checking here. Beautiful color on this, just stunning. And then what you want to do is let this rest. So you cover it with tin foil and you let it rest for 10 minutes or so, and then you slice into it. And that gives a chance for all the juices to reabsorb. But this was absolutely delicious, guys. This is definitely one of the better roast chickens I've ever made. So give this recipe a try. Thanks for watching, Tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment, and share. I have new content coming out every week.